Mysteries of the ancient world are things that we all think about at random times in our life. Things like Atlantis, the Great Pyramids, secrets of the Roman Empire, and many more. In this video, we'll go down some of the deepest rabbit holes in all of ancient history, like the fact that the Christian god might have once had a wife, a group of Roman soldiers might have once started a town in China, and many others, so let's jump into it right now. Let's kick it off with Adam's calendar. This is a megalithic stone circle about 100 feet in diameter located in Mpumalanga, South Africa. It's also called the African Stonehenge because, like the OG Stonehenge, it's a megalithic stone structure created by prehistoric people for like celestial purposes, probably. Alright, so the local South African people thought that this thing was probably created around 500 years ago, but that's not the current theory. Archaeologists are now saying that it could date all the way back to 75,000 years ago, maybe even up to 200,000 years ago, which is just so long ago it's incomprehensible. If it happens to be this old, it's probably the first man-made structure like this. It was created to be like the first calendar by these people. Its stones roughly align with solstices. The stones are also arranged in kind of a Orion constellation formation, and so on and so forth. Because of its connection to ancient astronomy, it gets its two nicknames. First, Adam's calendar, because obviously the first man-made structure was made by the first man, according to the Bible anyway. And second, the birthplace of the sun, because of its connection to the celestial body. Alright, so in general, there's no definitive evidence that suggests that this thing was created by men millennia ago, but there's also no proof that it wasn't, so it's really fun to speculate. The Baigong Pipes are a series of pipe-like structures found in and on White Mountain near the city of Dalinga, China. Upon first look, they seem to be really similar to the pipes that we use today to transport water and gas and stuff like that, but if you look again, they're definitely not recently man-made, at least. Some of these pipes lead to the shore and even the center of a lake, so you can assume they might be water pipes, but they don't exactly function like that. The pipes were analyzed and found to be 92% natural in their composition, but 8% was unidentifiable. You know what that could mean, right? Aliens. Well, that's probably not true. It's probably more like a naturally oxidized structure that just seems to look like pipes. Something like, you know, fossilized tree roots that were hollow in the center that make it look like pipes. It was more than likely something natural like this and wasn't actually used as pipes, but you know, it's pretty cool to think about. Some people, especially from the Dalinga area of China, believe that there was an ancient civilization out there and they probably used these pipes tens of thousands of years ago to transport water for irrigation or whatever, so you never know. Human-made ditches in the Amazon rainforest are just as the name implies. They're human-made ditches and geoglyphs that are carved into the ground in the land that's now the Amazon rainforest. These ditches are actually pretty prevalent, with some being up to 36 feet wide and 13 feet deep. That's a massive ditch. The thing is, most of these ditches weren't actually found until the 1980s, whenever they started clearing some of the Amazon rainforest for use in cattle farms. These things are thought to be quite literally thousands of years old, existing even before the Amazon rainforest was a thing. But here's the thing, we have no inkling at all as to why they were created. Theories say that they could have been used for drainage, defensive purposes, religious purposes, or even a prehistoric version of a supermarket where everybody got together and bought and sold their goods. There were actually some pots that were probably used for agricultural purposes found at one of the scenes, so that's where that theory comes from. The moral of the story is we simply don't know what these ditches were made for. If you're unaware, this is actually tier 6 of the Ancient Mysteries Iceberg series that we've been covering, so that's why all of these things are like unexplainable. They're very obscure. Just really quick, thanks a ton for watching. You have no idea how much it means to me. If you're enjoying, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. And now let's get back into it. The Rujm el-Hiri is a megalithic stone structure of concentric circles with a burial mound in the center. It's located about 10 miles off the coast of the Sea of Galilee in Syria, and it dates back to around 3000 BC. Like so many of the other stone structures we've already talked about, it's linked back to Stonehenge and referred to as Stonehenge of the East. This thing is made up of over 40,000 rocks, which makes sense as to why the outer circle in the series of concentric circles is 520 feet in diameter. That's basically a football field and a half, including the end zones, so that's just crazy. The burial mound that's in the center rises about 15 feet high, and here's a fun fact about that. It wasn't created until about 1,000 years after the series of concentric circles was. Alright, so what exactly was this place built for and who built it? Well, we don't have exact answers for either one of these questions, but we can assume one of two things about the creators. Number one, it was built by the early Bronze Age nomadic people of the Middle East, because that's just a layup. That's probably who it had to have been, unless number 2 is true. Number 2 is that it could have been giants. Giants known as Rephaim in the Bible could have built this structure, and out of all the crazy conspiracy theories I've talked about on this channel, this is one that could be the most true. There is over 40,000 tons worth of rocks that make up this structure, and archaeologists predict that it would have taken humans of the time about 25,000 working days to complete. That is 68 years. Most human projects are abandoned after like 3. Like, you know how quick people turn around these days. You know what would have sped up this process? Giants. Alright, so either way, this structure was built for something. Researchers believe that it could have just served as a tomb for somebody that's really important, which it definitely did serve as that at one point in time. That wasn't when it was created though. That was 1,000 years after, whenever they created the burial mound. It could have served as some sort of astronomical indicator. Its formations do match up with solstices and stuff like that, so it very well could be that. There's no concrete answer as to what it was used for, but it was probably something to do with the stars. The structure under the Sea of Galilee is a massive cone-shaped conglomeration of 60,000 tons worth of rocks that was found underwater in the Sea of Galilee. It has a massive diameter of 230 feet and it rises 32 feet high. This is basically twice the size of, guess what? Stonehenge, so that gives you an idea. The whole thing appears to be a massive rock cairn, or you know, a structure that was made by humans piling rocks on top of one another over and over and over again. The structure was actually accidentally found by a group of researchers using sonar to just scan under the water. While this location could suggest that men created the structure under the water for use as something like a fish nursery, it's far more likely that it was created on land and it eventually was just swallowed up by rising sea levels. Also, because of its location, it's very hard to do any kind of substantial study on it. It's under the sea. Rough estimates date its creation to anywhere from 2,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago, so we really just don't know. The Tophet at Carthage is a sacred place dedicated to the worship of the Phoenician gods Tanit and Baal that was involved in some very questionable activities. The activities in question are primarily child sacrifices. The Tophet served as both a sanctuary to perform these sacrifice rituals and a necropolis for the children that were affected. Like, all their tombs were there. As I said, this ritual dates back to the ancient Canaanite religion, then the Phoenician religion, then the Carthaginian religion. It was all just like a linear delineation of the religion. Child sacrifices were supposedly dedicated to the god Moloch in the Bible, but scholars today say that Moloch was more of a term that referred to the practice of sacrificing children itself. It wasn't an actual god, it was just the ritual. Within the site are tons of stelae, which are wooden slabs that serve as like memorials on the tombs, as well as urns and religious stuff like grave goods, all that kind of stuff. These urns obviously suggest that the biblical stories of child sacrifices involving the burning of their bodies was true, because, you know, I don't know if they were dead or alive, but their bodies were burned and put in these urns. There were over 20,000 urns found within the Tophet. If that many children were sacrificed, I really don't even know what to say. Let's just move on, because this is getting depressing. Why did the Cucuteni-Trypillia culture burn down their houses? Well, to start with, we got to figure out who these people were. These were the early people of southeastern Europe that existed between the years of like 5050 BC and 2950 BC, and they were mostly in the areas of like Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine. They had advanced pottery, agriculture, and eventually metallurgy. For some reason, these people seem to have purposefully burned down their homes every 60 to 80 years and then rebuilt them in the same spots. Now, most of their population centers were created around naturally fortified locations like canyon edges and river terraces, so it's thought that the burning down of these homes could have been to like reallocate the space that's in that limited area of fortification. Just one of these wooden structures was estimated to be about 7,500 square feet, so space allocation definitely could have been, you know, why they did this. Another theory as to why this happened is that these houses were actually looked at as part of the family. As the older family members died out, these structures were burned down with them in remembrance of them and then rebuilt by the newer generations. It could have been some kind of family or tribal ritual, because these were definitely controlled burns. Like, we know that they set these things on fire super hot, but they controlled the burns. So, you know, there's not enough concrete evidence to say either way as to why they were burned down, but it was on purpose. Atlantis of the Sands refers to the lost city of Ubar that was supposedly found in the southern deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, for some background, Ubar was thought to have been destroyed by a natural disaster or the wrath of a god, which are not mutually exclusive. I realize that now. It's actually linked to the legendary city of Iram from the Quran. Now, this city of Iram from the Quran is known as Iram of the Pillars, and it was destroyed by the Islamic God for their wickedness, kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah were. Fast forward to 1992, and archaeologists have found a lost city in the area of Oman in the Arabian Peninsula. This was deemed to be the lost city of Ubar, which was like a rich city, kind of like Atlantis was. Obviously, its similarities in the fact that it was lost and it was rich and all that give it the nickname Atlantis of the Seas. So to tie it all together, the remains that were found in 1992 may or may not actually be the city of Ubar, and if it is, then legends probably greatly overstate like the riches and marvels of this land. It seemed to be more of a trading post than like a thriving ancient city. Now, as I tried to explain earlier, theorists say that this land of Ubar was probably the land of Iram from the Quran, but there's not any substantial evidence to any of this stuff, so I'm just going to cut my losses on this one and move on. Cannabis burial shroud in China refers to a burial shroud made up of 13 cannabis plants that was found in a grave in Jiayi Cemetery in China. It dates back to around 400 BC, so it was probably created by the Subeshi people of the time of the area. The man that was buried was around 35 years old with Caucasian features, so it's likely that he was a traveler along the Silk Road that just didn't make it. Similar burials using cannabis have been found in the same area, including a woman that was found along the Silk Road that had breast cancer that was buried with like cannabis seeds, so this could be something similar. He could have suffered from something like cancer. Now, these 13 plants that were used in the shroud were fresh and probably green whenever they were used as the burial shroud, so they were probably grown in this area. The nomadic tribes of the Silk Road often use drugs and cannabis plants and stuff like that in their rituals, so there was probably no shortage of this kind of stuff around here. Now, this man that was buried seemed to have been some kind of like shaman or religious leader of his warrior-like people because of the grave goods and the cannabis burial shroud. That's what they all suggest. I guess he was buried with a cannabis shroud because of the as in life, so in death philosophy. Liquid mercury at Teotihuacan refers to pools of liquid mercury that were found underneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Mexico. Teotihuacan is an ancient city and culture that predates even the Aztecs, thought to have been established in like 100 BC. This Temple of the Feathered Serpent is just one of the marvels that these people created, along with the pyramids of the sun and the moon. Anyway, despite this structure sitting there for about 2,000 years, nobody knew that there was an underground chamber underneath the temple until 2003. It wasn't even explored until 2015 because that's how fast archaeologists work. I know there's a lot of red tape cutting and all that kind of stuff, but I really wish people would just get a move on with exploring some of these things. But anyway, along with thousands of artifacts that were found that tell us things about this culture, there were also these small pools of mercury found in this chamber. Archaeologists think it probably was once a flowing river of mercury that was meant to resemble like the river Styx, you know, kind of from Greek mythology, like a gate to the underworld, something like that. Now, my mind immediately goes to the tomb of Qin Shi Huang that's said to have flowing rivers of mercury very similar to this. Some think that this liquid mercury river indicates that there could be like a royal tomb somewhere nearby, but they haven't found one yet, to my knowledge anyway. St. Thomas silver coins in India refers to ancient coins thought to be linked to St. Thomas, who was an apostle of Jesus, who was said to have come to India to spread Christianity. According to the apocryphal text, the Acts of Thomas, he supposedly traveled to India, started some churches, and was then executed in India. In the areas where he started churches, these ancient coins have been popping up left and right. Since like the 19th and 20th centuries, these coins are popping up and they seem to depict St. Thomas. They're typically bronze coins, but they do have some traces of silver. There's a whole theory about these coins being the ones that Judas got whenever he betrayed Jesus, but I'm not going to go into that part. Now, these coins do depict Christian imagery such as crosses, fish, and even depictions of St. Thomas himself, so, you know, it could be real. Now, I will say it's highly debated as to whether these things were created all the way back in the 1st century or if they were later minted by like the Roman or Byzantine Empire, something like that. There's no guarantee that these coins show the direct involvement of Thomas in India, but it seems pretty likely to me. The Griffin warrior tomb is a tomb that was found in Pylos, Greece that dates all the way back to 1450 BC, which would have been in the height of the Mycenaean Greek culture. The grave itself was found in a stone shaft that contained a wooden coffin, over 3,500 Greek artifacts, and the body of a man who died around the age of 30 to 35 years old. He seemed to have been very rich due to the sheer amount of artifacts that were found, but he also could have been like a leader or somebody really important. He had tons of gold, ivory, and and bronze artifacts that were found with him, but he also had something that connected him to a totally different culture, and that was a Minoan seal stone. This seal stone, along with many of these other artifacts upon further inspection, suggests that this man was deeply involved with the Minoans on Crete. All that is despite the fact that he was actually a Mycenaean Greek. Now, prior to this discovery, the Mycenaean Greeks and the Minoans on Crete were thought to have stayed in their own lanes for the most part. There weren't many crossover episodes unless they were just fighting. It's thought that this Griffin warrior, who actually gets his name from an ivory plaque that featured a griffin on it, was actually an administrator or somebody that ruled over the Minoans for the Mycenaeans. Either that or he just did a lot of trading with them or something like that. He was important to both cultures. Because of this great wealth of artifacts and the clear connection to Crete before it was absorbed by Greece, the finding of this tomb was very important to Greek historians. Where is Jesus's foreskin? I can tell we're in the depths of the iceberg now. Jesus' foreskin, also known as the Holy Prepuce, is exactly what you think it is. According to Luke chapter 2 verse 21, Jesus was circumcised at 8 days of age like every other Jewish boy of the time. Since then, a bunch of weird people have developed a fascination for this cut off skin for some reason. I guess since Jesus' actual body was said to have gone back to heaven, people think that this little bit of skin that was cut off is like all that's left of his body on the earth, which I guess I can understand, but that's just weird. Anyway, many different European churches have claimed to have had this over the years. Somebody claims that it's currently located in the local parish church of Calcutta, India, also known as the Church of the Holy Name, but I don't know. I'm moving on. I feel sacrilegious even talking about this. Apollonius of Tyana was a Greek philosopher and supposed miracle worker from Tyana, which is in modern-day Turkey. He supposedly lived from the year 3 BC to 97 AD, and he was a follower of Pythagoras. He supposedly took a Pythagorean vow of silence, which is when you don't say anything for 5 years, which is crazy because I'd just be yapping all the time. I don't think I could do it. After all that learning under Pythagoras, he started his travels. He supposedly traveled to India to seek wisdom from Hindu sages and also study at the city of Taxila, which was like the city that was the learning hub of the entire area. Like that's where all the smart people gathered. Kind of like Alexandria. Speaking of Alexandria, he was said to have traveled there to learn from priests of all different faiths and backgrounds. Now we can get to his miracles. Just like Jesus, this guy was said to have performed lots of miracles. This includes healing the sick, exorcising demons, raising the dead, and even teleporting? Now, I've heard of all the first ones with Jesus and the apostles, but teleporting? I mean, what are you, Isotope from Invincible? As you can imagine, all this kind of stuff led to comparisons between him and Jesus all the time. Just like Jesus, he was definitely a real historical figure, but this guy most definitely wasn't a miracle worker. Regardless of your beliefs, you got to admit that the entire New Testament of the Bible is a better and more likely to be accurate source of information than like the pseudo-biography that Philostratus wrote for this guy. He didn't even write it till 100 years after this guy was supposedly dead, so I don't believe it. He was just a historical figure in my mind. Asherah was a great mother goddess from the ancient Semitic religions of the Near East. She was deeply associated with fertility and creation, and she has actually gone by many different names. She was known as the consort of many ancient gods, including Yahweh, before the ancient Israelites converted to like monotheism under Yahweh. So yes, she might have been the wife of God, which is crazy. There are tons of references to her in ancient religions, and in general, she's thought to be the equal partner in creation of the male god that was her counterpart. There's also actually been a link between Asherah and the biblical Eve that's being studied right now. In the Near East, Asherah is represented by what's known as Asherah poles. These are sacred trees dedicated to her worship, and during the entirety of the Old Testament, God constantly has to get his priests and prophets to destroy these things. Now, if you remember, Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it led to her eventual downfall and exile from the Garden of Eden, all that kind of stuff. Just as Asherah was outlawed by God, so was Eve cast out of the Garden of Eden. They both had their downfall, and it was both linked to a pole or a sacred tree. The ancient Israelites had some weird ideas, and I think they kind of conflated these two characters in their minds somehow, but let me know what you think about this down below. It's really interesting. The Cromlech at Almendres is a megalithic stone structure in a circular pattern located in Portugal that dates back to around 6000 BC. Like basically everything else, this predates Stonehenge, and it's comprised of 95 granite monument stones monuments arranged in various patterns. Now it's built to face the sunrise and the sunset, but its purpose is even more vague than the ones we've already talked about. It's believed that these stones served either religious purposes or as some sort of astronomical observatory. It was actually constructed in several phases. First, the concentric circles, and then the concentric ellipses. Oh yeah, we can't forget about the nickname of this place. I'll give you a second to guess it. It's not hard. Portuguese Stonehenge. Alright, so I understand that Stonehenge is awesome and everything, but not everything has to be named the blank Stonehenge. Like, there's like 12 that we've covered in this entire series. All of these Stonehenges are... It's not Stonehenge. There's one Stonehenge. Everything else is its own monument. I'm so tired of it. People need to get a different naming system. Nitocris is a legendary character written about by Herodotus who may or may not have served as the last ruler of the Old Kingdom of Egypt. This story takes place in around 2100 BC, and she's said to have come into power after the Egyptian people murdered her brother who was the ruler. To avenge her brother, it's said that she gathered everyone that was instrumental in killing him into like a celebratory feast, but this was all a facade. Once she got everyone in the room and they were enjoying their feast or whatever, she flooded the room with a trapdoor that had the river Nile, like all the water from it just flooded the room and killed them all. She shut it off. It was like a closed chamber. They all drowned. After this, she didn't want to face the repercussions of her actions, so she actually just offed herself. What followed this was the beginning of the first intermediate period of Egypt. Now, all of this should be taken with a grain of salt because these were all Greek writings that talked about her. Like, there's no Egyptian records basically anywhere that says that she was even real. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. No tomb was found, no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, nothing. So, she's also been linked to the construction of the third pyramid at Giza, but yet again, there's literally no evidence as to where this comes from. It was just written about by some Hellenistic priest guy. This is a mystery that's probably more myth than reality, but it's still a really good story. The Lost Roman Legion in Liqian is a story that says that a Roman legion that fought in the Battle of Carrhae in Turkey was taken prisoner following the Roman loss, and they eventually became mercenaries and settled down in Asia. The supposed evidence for this theory is a written testimony of Chinese soldiers that fought in a battle that says that the people they fought against were in like a fish scale formation, which is also known as the Roman testudo formation of like a Roman phalanx. It's when they interlock their shields. Anyway, legend has it that this Roman legion settled down in the city of Liqian near the Silk Road in China. The inhabitants of this town to this day believe that they descend from this Roman legion. They even seemingly have European facial features, light eyes, light hair, and stuff like that. Obviously, that's totally different from the general population of China, but whenever you think about it, this place right here is pretty close to like the Siberian area, so it could have been, you know, Eastern Europeans. Who knows? Thing is, this story and the features of these people were enough to bring in a set of genetic researchers to actually test these people and see if they descended from a Roman legion. 87 villagers were tested, but only 3 of them had clear links to European genetics, with the rest of them being totally like inconclusive. None of them had any clearly Roman DNA in them, just European. So while that's not too promising, it doesn't rule it out either. Archaeological digs around the city have found buried walls and defensive formations, stuff like that, that actually do resemble like Roman formations, as well as some like Romanesque pottery. Overall, there's not enough evidence to say yay or nay, but I'd really like to think that this Roman legion did settle down here because that's just really cool. The Siberian Ice Maiden is a mummy from around 2500 years ago that was found in a tomb in the Altai Mountains in Siberia. Unlike most others in the area, her tomb was unlooted and her body was undefiled, so they both tell us a lot about her culture. She was only in her mid-20s, but she was clearly high-ranking in her society. She had super detailed tattoos of like deer, griffin-like creatures, and other beast-like figures. She also had super fancy clothing for the time, like a silk blouse, a crimson wool skirt, and thigh-high felt boots. The maiden was also buried with some of the craziest grave goods you will literally ever hear about, starting with 6 fully bridled and saddled horses. These horses had been executed like they had head wounds from a pickaxe or something like that to put them down, so you know that they thought a lot of this woman. They literally killed 6 of the most useful animals in history and buried them with this woman. That's crazy. They thought she might need them in the afterlife for some reason. I don't know about you, but I can only ride 1 horse at a time, so I don't know why she would ever need 6, but That's up to them, I guess. Anyway, she was also buried in a very intricately carved and painted wooden coffin, which definitely signifies that she was very high up in the Siberian Paziric culture of the time. Inside her tomb were cannabis seeds and psychoactive herbs that were probably used in rituals of the time. Finally, some luxurious Chinese silk was found inside, and that stuff was not cheap at all. Obviously, this woman was basically revered, but what ended up killing her? Well, if you remember earlier in the video, I mentioned a woman along the Silk Road that died with breast cancer. This woman was the Siberian Ice Maiden. Now, whether or not it actually killed her, we don't know, because she also had some wounds that were probably from a fall or accident or something like that, but we do know for a fact that she did have breast cancer, so that could have been it. The Yonaguni Monument is a massive underwater rock formation off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, that actually has a massive controversy associated with it. Alright, I'll tell you the controversy part in a second, but first you gotta see this thing. It's super clean cut, and it looks like it was man-made into the form of like a step pyramid or a ziggurat or something like that. Now that's where the controversy lies, actually. Lots of people believe that it's the remains of an old city or at least a man-made structure, but some people think that it's a natural formation. This thing stretches out to be 165 feet long by 65 feet wide, so it's huge. It has that pyramid-like structure I was talking about. It has walls, passageways, platforms. It even has a central platform that people thought was a throne. Now on the other side of the argument, people have studied the Yonaguni Island itself and found formations that were clearly naturally formed that were very similar to this thing in the water. The chances of it actually being man-made are very slim, but it would have been cool. So basically what I'm saying is Japanese Atlantis is probably not real, but I definitely could get behind some, you know, mermaid waifus, you know what I'm saying? Speaking of Atlantis, check out this video that actually serves as the starting point of this entire series if you haven't watched it already. It covers Atlantis and many other ancient mysteries, so give it a shot. I'm gonna go visit this Japanese Atlantis for reasons that I'm not legally obligated to tell you. Peace.